Right, good morning, everybody. Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova.
גמר חתימה טובה.
Good to be back. We have the opportunity to spend some time learning together during a Aseret Tshuva. From next week, we'll be on a little bit of a break again until after Sukkot. I'll let you know when the show will resume, but glad to be back today. So let's go back a little bit. We're in the Masechet Beit Daf Yud Zayin. We were at the bottom of Amud Aleph, beginning of Amud Bet. If you go back to Amud Aleph for just a moment, so we've been discussing the concept of Eruv Tavshilin.
Yeah.
Those of us in Eretz Yisrael, which is all of you here, we can all now forget about Eruv Tavshilin for a few more years. But for those in Chutz La'aretz, right, remember, coming up to Sukkot, it will be 2 days, so Thursday, Friday. So they'll have to make an Eruv Tavshilin. And then again, for Shmini Atzeret, they'll have to make an Eruv Tavshilin. As somebody asked me, just by the way, when you have the 2 days, as we had here, Rosh Hashanah, or in Chutz La'aretz, you have the 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot. So ironically, you might have thought, if I make the Eruv already from the first day Yom Tov, I can start preparing, but that is not the case. It's only the Yom Tov, which is immediately Samuch to Shabbat, that the Eruv allows you to prepare, not from the first day to the second day Yom Tov. In any event, so the Gemara is discussing what happened if somebody forgot to do the Eruv, right? So we've already seen, we know that the Rav of the Keilah, of the city, or whoever, makes an Eruv and includes everybody in his Eruv. However, one cannot rely on that lekatchila, meaning if you forgot and it happened once, and then you forgot, so then you can go to the Rav and say, I forgot to make an Eruv, and he'll say, don't worry, we saw the story of Shmuel. And he said, don't worry, you can rely on mine. And then the next year, the guy came back and he said, I forgot to make an Eruv. And Shmuel said, not so fast. That's right, now you're a Poshea, and that doesn't work. But the question was, when other people could cook for you, other people would have to cook for you if you can't cook. So we saw here, it's say on page Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the bottom, where the Gemara asked this question. It said, Ibailu mi shelo aniach eruvei tavshilin hu nesa v'kimcho nesa or dema hu nesa v'en kimcho nesa. Okay, so that was one question we asked. We said, is it just the person, or is it also their flour, right, their food as well, and would they have to make a kinyan somebody else in order to cook for them? And that was what we said. But then we saw, you're right, so we dealt with that. Then 4 lines from the bottom we had another question, which was Ibailahu avar v'afa mai. Right? Somebody did not make an Eruv Tavshilin, they have nothing to rely on, they are now forbidden to go and cook, and they did nonetheless, right? Avar v'afa, they went and, in this case, baked. We'll see if there's a difference between cooking and baking. There may be, there may not be. But somebody went and cooked the Shabbos food on Yom Tov without an Eruv. So what's the din? Are they now allowed to go and eat that food? That is our question. The Gemara is going back and forth now with a number of proofs. So let's just take it from here. So we said Tashma. Come and learn a proof from here. Misha lo aniach eruvei tavshilin ketzad. Right, somebody who does not, says the Braita, somebody who does not have an Eruv Tavshilin, what should they do? Makneh kimcho lacherim v'acherim ofin lo mavashlin lo. You would make a kinyan of your flour, right, to somebody else, and then they could go and they could bake and they could cook for you, and then you could eat. So it says the Gemara over the page, if it's true that b'di'evid, if you went and cooked without your Eruv, you could go and eat it. So then the Braita should have said that. It didn't say that. So he said, Amar vara b'matna, tanan takanta de tera ktani, takanta de sora lo ktani. You say, no, not necessarily. It's not necessarily a proof, because the Braita wants to teach us what you can do in a way that is permitted, and not what you can do b'di'evid in a way that is forbidden. Right? So that's fine. That's no contradiction. Second proof. Second attempted proof. We're now 3 lines from the top on Amud Bet. Right? Tashma. Mi sheniach eruv tavshilin arei ze ofer mevashel matmin. V'im ratza le'echol et eruvo hareshut beyado. Ach lo. Ad shelo afa, ad shelo yatmin. Harei ze lo yofer v'lo yivashel v'lo yatmin. Lo v'lo ולא לאחרים, ולא האחרים אופין ומתפשלין לא, אבל למשל ליום טוב ומתיר לשבת ובלבד שלא ירם. Okay, read through a lot. Let's just understand, because there's a few different parts to this Braita, and the proof is really only going to come from the end. So again, from the top, the Braita says, Mi sheniach eruvei tavshilin. somebody who made an eruv tavshilin, harei zofer vashel matmin. One can cook and bake and insulate food. We're going to see a bit further on a machloke between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. When we distinguish between ofer, mevashel, and matmin, right? Does that mean that in order to have an eruv tavshilin, so in order to bake, I need a baked good, and in order to cook, I need a cooked food, and in order to do hatmana, I need something which is mutman. So Beit Shammai is going to say yes, for each of those are three separate actions, and for each one needs a separate component of the eruv tavshilin. But Beit Hillel don't rule that way. Beit Hillel say no, you just have the eruv, you have one cooked food, and that's enough. To cook, to bake, it's all the same. But in any event, so harei zofer vashel matmin. So you have the eruv tavshilin, you can do what you need to do. If you want to eat the eruv, you're allowed to. Generally speaking, we should eat the eruv. Remember, the eruv is a food. The reason it works is we have a food which is set aside from before Yom Tov, it's set aside for Shabbat. And it's designated with, reminds us that we have to prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat, reminds us we have to make special Shabbos food. So generally speaking, we should eat the eruv on Shabbat. That's the best time. But what if you ate it before? What if you ate it on Yom Tov? So on Yom Tov, when I want to cook, I don't have an eruv left. So achalo achelo afal achelo itmin, achelo bishal achelo itmin. In other words, if the eruv was consumed, but the eruv was lost, you didn't have the eruv anymore before you've done your cooking or your baking or whatever sort of preparing. Well, now you can't. You can only do it if you have the eruv, and now you don't have the eruv. Okay, but so this is what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a situation where I don't actually have an eruv. I made an eruv before Yom Tov, but then I ate the eruv on Yom Tov. Right? I couldn't wait. I was too hungry. I got confused. I saw the schnitzel in the fridge. I thought it was just a snack, and it was actually the eruv tavshilin. Oops! Right? So now I can't cook for Shabbat. So what can I do? So says the Braita Aval. This is still on Yom Tov. Mevashel hu Yom Tov. You can cook for Yom Tov. It's Yom Tov for the same day, right? We're not saying cook from first day to the second day of Yom Tov. We're dealing with on the second day of Yom Tov now. Mevashel hu Yom Tov. Ve'im hotir l'Shabbat. And if you have left over, you have left over for Shabbat. One second. But you can't do it in a way that it's harama. You can't say, I'm going to cook all this food for Yom Tov, which I actually want for Shabbat. That doesn't work. Yeah.
But that's the same thing as if he had never made an eruv, right?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
If he made an eruv and it no longer exists, it's as if he never made an eruv.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Lemay says the same thing. So the point is, so we're saying we're in a situation where one does not have an eruv, so you can cook for Yom Tov, actually, genuinely cook for Yom Tov, and if you had a bit of food left over, so you have left over for Shabbat. Everybody has food left over. I don't know. I don't know anybody who cooks for Yom Tov and doesn't cook too much. But okay, right? But if you weren't genuinely cooking for Yom Tov, you were cooking for Shabbat. And you were just doing harama. So that's forbidden. Im herim asur. So what do we see from here? We see from here that if you cooked in a way which was forbidden, that you weren't allowed to, you aren't allowed to eat the food. So from there, say, would this be a proof for our case that if a person, right, what was that question? Our question was, you don't have an eruv, afvar v'afar. We're not talking about harama, Shabbat, whatever. You went and cooked when you didn't have the eruv. So for this case, it's very similar. Just here it's harama for Shabbat. So Amar Rav Ashi says, no, this is not a proof. This is not a proof because, it's harama kamalta. This is when we're dealing with harama, shani harama dachmir beRabbanan tfei mimezid. That the Rabbanan were more stringent. Because it comes by harama, sometimes we have to be more stringent, because that's a situation whereby you could say, you could pretend that you were doing it for a permitted reason. It's not just mezid, it's a different category. So that is one answer. That's Rav Ashi's answer as to why this is not a proof. Okay, now if Nachman Bar Yitzchak gives a different answer. Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, no, I'm not going, I'll tell you why this is not a proof. Not because we distinguish between harama and mezid necessarily, but rather what? Amar ha-mani chananyahi v'aliba de Beit Shammai. He says, this Braita, now you'll see, this is why it didn't just say somebody doesn't have an eruv, but this is why the Braita gave me that whole introduction, because that's how I know that this is the opinion of Hanania, who follows Beit Shammai. Everybody remembers Hanania from Perakira and Shabbat, where we talk about what food you can leave on the fire for Shaya and Chazara, how cooked your food has to be. So there's a famous machloket over there. One of the opinions is the opinion of Hanania. But over here, Hanania follows Beit Shammai, and he says, Tanya, Hanania omer, Beit Shammai omrim, ein ofin elam ken erev bapat, ve'en mevashlim elam ken erev betavshil, ve'en tomnim elam ken hayu chamin tmonin me'erev yom tov, Right, this is the machloket. I mentioned this previously. This is a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as to what is the effect of the Eruv. By the way, there are other things that the Eruv allows you to do. It's not just cooking, right? It's lighting candles, setting the table, etc. Is Beit Shammai going to say you have to set the table? Is Beit Shammai going to say you have to light the candle? No, that's not, because the Eruv Tavshilin is just a food that I have set aside. But he says the way that food is prepared, that is, it allows you that form of food preparation. So it says Beit Shammai, if you have a cooked food, you're allowed to cook. If you have a baked food, you're allowed to bake. And if you have food which is mutman, which is insulated, you're allowed to do hatmana. But if you only had, let's say you only had a schnitzel in your Eruv Tavshilin, according to Beit Shammai, you can't bake. Or if you only used a roll in your Eruv Tavshilin, according to Beit Shammai, you can't cook. Beit Hillel say no. Beit Hillel say no, I have one tafshil, and that's for everything. It's the broad category of tafshil, of bishul, and that includes cooking, that includes baking, that includes everything. But that's why, how do we know that this Braita follows that opinion? Because that was the whole introduction. It said, it listed those three categories. So the reason it lists those three categories is to tell you that each one of those is a separate Eruv, is a separate requirement. That is the opinion of Beit Shammai. And Hanania follows Beit Shammai. So what if Hanania follows Beit Shammai? How does that answer our question? So it answers our question as follows. Again, what's our question? Our question is, we started off saying, somebody who went and transgressed and cooked even though they didn't have an Eruv Tavshilin, are they allowed to eat the food? Right? That's our question. So our attempted proof here is from the Braita, which says that if somebody who doesn't have an Eruv Tavshilin, they ate the Eruv Tavshilin, whatever, Lamaisa, they don't have an Eruv Tavshilin. If they cook for the same day, they're allowed to. If they have food left over from what they cooked, that's permitted. If they did harama, that's forbidden. Okay, so we said that seemingly is the same case, and that seemingly shows us that if you cooked food in a way you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to eat it. So answer number one, rejection number one of that proof was Rav Ashi, who said that no, they're dealing about a case of harama, and our question is about mezid, and those are two separate categories. Okay, that was answer number one. Answer number two is Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. I should say rejection number two says no. It's not that we distinguish between harama and mezid per se. It's because this Braita follows the opinion of Beit Shammai. Okay, nothing to do with transgressing and eating or whatever. But what do we see? We see from Beit Shammai, we see that Beit Shammai is more stringent in general in the rules of Eruv than Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai is more stringent. We know explicitly they're more stringent in that they make us make a different category of Eruv for each category of cooking, which Beit Hillel do not require. And therefore it stands to reason that Beit Shammai also said, well, if you cooked and you weren't allowed to, you aren't allowed to eat it. They're more stringent in the rules of Eruv, but Beit Hillel are not as stringent. And therefore Beit Hillel could still say, okay, just like you only need to make one Eruv. If you transgressed and you cooked without the Eruv, remember, all of this is a rabbinic prohibition. So the rabbis can come and say, we require you to make an Eruv Tavshilin, but b'diavad, you didn't make an Eruv Tavshilin, and you transgressed and you cooked, even though it's okay, you can still eat it for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov. So therefore, Beit Hillel could say that. Again, we don't have a proof that it's permitted. All that we've done at this point is rejected the proof that it's forbidden. Okay, so that's that. So we say, right? Beit Hillel, nearly halfway down the page. Beit Hillel omrim ma'arev v'tavshil echad v'oseh bo kol tzorko. Okay, so that's so. If you see Rashi, Rashi says Hamani diktani im herim asur. Who is the one who taught us that if you did harama, then it's asur and you can't eat that food? That's Hanania. Hanania the shamina leita machmir be'ervei tavshilin. Where we hear that Hanania has a more machmir opinion when it comes to eruv tavshilin in general. Valiba the Beit Shammai, and that follows That follows Beit Shammai. Okay, so let's go on to the next proof. Next attempted proof says the Gemara. There's a change here in my Gemara. I don't know what it is in your Gemara, but in my Gemara it's printed Tnan, which is generally quoting a Mishnah, because we are quoting a Mishnah. But the Masarat Hashas changes that to Tashma. To be Tashma because we're introducing the next proof. Okay, and this is from the Mishnah in Trumot. We're going to quote a few different parts of this Mishnah to see. But here's the next attempted proof. So we say Tashma, HaMe'aser perotav b'Shabbat. Okay, somebody was separating Masrot from his perot, from his fruits on Shabbat. Now that is not permitted. Probably because it is metaken mana, or it looks like metaken mana. You're correcting the fruits. Until now you couldn't eat them because they were tevel. Now you could eat them because you're separating the masrot. Right? That has to be done before Shabbat. But if somebody transgressed and did it on Shabbat, hamaser perotav b'Shabbat, b'shogeg yochal, b'mezid lo yochal. So says the Mishnah over there that if it was done b'shogeg, shogeg means right it's always very hard to translate these words. Unintentionally, I guess you would say, right? Meaning a person wasn't aware that it was Shabbat, or they weren't aware that this was forbidden. That's shogeg. Yochal, you can still eat them. B'mezid lo yochal. If you did it b'mezid, it was done intentionally, you cannot eat. Okay, so that would seemingly be a proof for us that just like there b'mezid lo yochal, here too, you cooked without the eruv, and therefore you should not be able to eat. See Rashi, b'mezid lo yochal, shaval hashvut, because the person transgressed. Again, the Isoria of separating masrot is Sud Rabbanan. The ein magin trumot masrot b'yom tov. Al ma'achmor Rabbanan b'miltayo afilu gabei oneg Shabbat. Therefore, we see that Rabbanan was stringent even when it comes to oneg Shabbat. So says the Gemara, right? So we said Tashma Maaseh Perotav b'Shabbat b'Shogeg Yochal b'Mezid Lo Yochal. So no, Lo tzricha de'it le pirei acharine. Say no, that's not a proof. That case is talking about where you have other fruits. In other words, Rabbanan there was stringent, and they said b'Mezid you separate the teva from these fruits because you have something else to eat. But if you don't have anything else to eat, that's our case by Eruv Tavshilin. Right? You don't have anything else to eat. Maybe over there, Rabbanan would have allowed you. So we continue. The Mishnah continues. Tashma. Hamatbil ke'elav b'Shabbat. B'shogeg yishtamesh ben, b'mezid lo yishtamesh ben. Somebody who goes and we're going to talk more about this in the next Mishnah. But somebody goes and his toivel goes to matbil their kelim, right, their dishes or whatever on Shabbat in the mikveh. Now this is not talking about the tefillah that we do nowadays. This is not talking about the tefillah when I purchase new utensils that were manufactured, that were owned by a non-Jew, and I purchase them and I have to go and toivel them in the mikveh. That is one type of hatpalah. There is another type, which is tumot and tarot, right? Which is where something becomes tamei and something becomes tahor. We don't do any of this today. We don't have the Beit HaMikdash. We're not makpid on these things. We have remnants of it. For example, in the fact that we wash our hands before bread, right? And certain things the Kohanim do, but in other words, but once the kli has become tamei, right? But the point is, you can't use that kli in that state until you've gone and you've put it in the mikveh. Now that also is something you can't do on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So we say Tashma, Hamat bil kelav v'Shabbat. B'shogeg yishtamesh ben, mezid lo yishtamesh ben. Same thing. If it was shogeg, you can use them. If it was mezid, you can't use them. So again, we see somebody transgressed by mezid, and you can't use it. You can't benefit from it. We'd say you won't be able to eat it. So again, says so it gives two answers now. The first answer is exactly the same. You have other kelim that you can use. So Chachamim weren't bothered by the fact that we can give you this knas because you can eat off a different plate. Inami, efshar b'sheila. Alternatively, you can go and you can borrow from somebody else, and therefore it's not a problem. It's not preventing you from oneg Shabbat. Whereas in our case of eruv tavshilin, maybe it is. Okay, another attempted proof. I think this is the last one. Tashma, hamevashel b'Shabbat b'shogeg yochal b'mezid lo yochal. And we have a Mishnah that tells us that if somebody cooks on Shabbat, And this is the closest. Okay, on Shabbat you can't cook because there's an Isur Melacha. On Yom Tov you can't cook because you don't have an Eruv Tavshilin. Fine, but either way you're cooking and it's forbidden. B'shogeg yochab mezid lo If it was shogeg, one could eat. If it was mezid, one cannot eat. So answer the Gemara, no, we saw the Shabbat Shani. You can't compare. You can't compare the Isur Melacha, Chachamim were kones, where somebody did the Isur Melacha of Bishul on Shabbat, versus where somebody cooked without an Eruv Tavshilin. Okay, so that's where we end. So the bottom line is, we've had 5 or 6 different attempted proofs, and each one of them is rejected. It's important to understand, when we reject the proof, it is not a conclusive proof the other way around, but it just means we don't have a proof one way or the other. So the bottom line, somebody went and cooked on Shabbat, cooked on Yom Tov, for Shabbat, without the Eruv Tavshilin. Are they allowed to go and then eat the food? Well, we don't know. That is
as far as Shabbat cooking, the possibility of putting a pot into the oven that has fluid in it, apparently that is a consideration of Mevashel B'Shabbat.
It has liquid?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Meat, and it has liquid in it, whatever used before, and you heat that up, I suppose that's called Mevashel B'Shabbat.
Yeah, so I'm going to use your question as a shameless plug for my Sunday morning Tzubah Rabbanan shiur, which we've been discussing Bishul B'Shabbat. The last 2 weeks we've been discussing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But B'ezrat Hashem, after Sukkot, we'll go back to talking about Shabbat and Bishul, and that's exactly what we said. The question is, right, if I take raw food and I cook it on Shabbat, right, that's completely forbidden. If I have food which has been fully cooked, because what is cooking? Cooking is taking raw food and making it cooked. If I have food which has been cooked before, okay, so then the question comes up. The question is regarding bishul, what we call bishul achar bishul. Now, according to some opinions, this is the way we go. According to many Rishonim, there is no bishul achar bishul, which means once food has been cooked, if I reheat it again on a d'oraita level, there is no cooking again. D'Rabbanan, there's all sorts of questions. How can I heat it up? Where can I put it? On which fire? Can I put it in on the hot plate directly or not? Right? We haven't spoken about that yet. So there's still time to join the shiur and learn about that. But in terms of d'oraita, in terms of cooking, so according to many Rishonim, once it's cooked, it's cooked. However, there is an opinion, and this is the way we follow, that we distinguish between solids and liquids. So a solid food that has been cooked, right? If I have schnitzel, for example, in the fridge, and I take it out and I put it back on the hot plate in a way that I've avoided the rabbinic issues, there is no question of cooking. But if I have a liquid food, right, like have chicken soup or any soup or whatever it is, which has been cooked, but it's now cooled down, if it is cold, then we consider that to be essentially raw. So if I put that back on the fire on Shabbat, I'm going to be cooking, and then it's going to be an Isur D'Oraita. Now, because there are Rishonim who allow it, okay, again, we don't pass on this way, but there are those who allow it. Therefore, Imam, if in a situation of B'di'evet, of Shatatrak, extenuating circumstances, I'm a guest in somebody's home, and they did this because they didn't know, so there's what to do about it. But am I allowed to do it in the first place? Am I allowed to take cold liquid and put it on the fire on Shabbat? Absolutely not. That is forbidden. That would be considered. We would hold that is considered cooking. Again, there's a lot of discussion in the opinion of the Rama as to what he holds. Is it d'oraita? Is it d'Rabbanan? Depends if you hold like the Chazon Ish or the Egleital, etc. I refer you to Summa B'Rabbanan for more details on that. Okay, let's just finish up the Gemara. So now move on to something new, something related but slightly new. We say as follows. We're now by the 2 dots. We said Beit Shammai Omrim Shnei Tavshilin. Okay, we saw in the Mishnah that Beit Shammai said you needed to have 2 cooked foods as opposed to 1 cooked food. So it says, right, Beit Hillel said you can have 1 cooked food. What the Mishnah said, it said Beit Shammai said we need 2 cooked foods for the Eruv. Beit Hillel said 1 is sufficient. And we said Shavin, both agree, but Dagu Beitzah She'alav Shein Shnei Tavshilin. If you're making schnitzel, so you have or fish, and you coat it with egg on top, that is the fish and the egg, that's considered 2 cooked foods. That satisfies this opinion. So now says the Gemara that our Mishnah is not like the Tana of the following Braita. Matnitin the Loki Haitana. Our Mishnah that says this is not like this Tana who holds in a Braita, the Tanya. Amar Bisham ben Elazar Mud'im Beit Shammai Beit Hillel Shnei Tavshilin. Rabbi Shem ben Elazar says, okay, not like our Mishnah, which said Beit Shammai says 2 and Beit Hillel says 1. Here it says Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree that you need 2 tavshilin. right? So what's their machloket? Their machloket is al dag ubeitza shalav, that the fish and the egg which is coating it, Beit Shammai omrim shnei tavshilin, and Beit Hillel omrim tavshil echad. That Beit Shammai considers that to be 2, and Beit Hillel considers that to be 1. Okay, so according to this brayta, Beit Hillel comes up as the one who's being much more machmir. V'shavin. So what do they agree about? You sort of mashed up an egg and you put that inside the fish. Or you took these vegetables and you mashed them up and you put that here, maybe stuffed the fish. I'm not sure exactly. That is considered two foods. Okay. But how do we pass at the end of the day? Rava says no, halacha, and this is the way we paskin, follows our Tana, in other words, our Mishnah, and we follow Beit Hillel. We follow Beit Hillel in the sense that we only need 1 tavshil. Now the minhag, nonetheless, and you probably noticed, is that generally speaking, we actually do take 2. Again, what we're saying is that l'mayaseh will be enough to take 1 cooked food for the Eruv Tavshilin. So why often do we take 2? Or sometimes people take an egg or a schnitzel or fish, whatever, and a roll as well. So Tosfot discusses this. Maybe we'll look at the Tosfot tomorrow inside. But he says essentially, remember we had a machloket, which was, if I have just 1 cooked food, does that allow me to bake as well? So we saw there was a machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Rabbeinu Tam is actually machmir on that point. And Rabbeinu Tam says that we should follow the stringent opinion. Therefore, we should have a cooked food and a baked food. So what we paskin at the end of the day is that mikara din, it's not required. If you just had one cooked food, that would be enough. But lekatchila, we try and take into account the stringent opinion, and therefore we try and have both the cooked food and the baked food together. And that way you have 2 tavshilim, you have cooked and you have baked, and you should satisfy all the opinions. And so whenever we have, Yom Tov, which is going to come up on, we're going to have Yom Tov, which comes up on Erev Shabbat. I'm not sure when the next time is in Eretz Israel, but now we know what to do for our Erev Tavshilin. Okay, Adkan. So tomorrow we'll carry on just before the Mishnah. Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow regular time at 8:45. Obviously next week then there won't be a shiur and we'll resume after the Chagim, but we'll see you all tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem.
I've 2 quick questions.
Yeah.
If you forgot to make an Erev Tavshilin, is that a one-time pass for your entire lifetime, or is it the one time that you're in a particular town?
You mean in terms of
you forgot to make an Erev Tavshilin, so you go to the Rav and you say, okay, slachli, I forgot to put it. Say, okay, you have one time you can do this. After that, you can't be Yotze with me. Is that how it works? Or is it, if he goes to a different town, does he get another chance?
You're saying when does it reset, so to speak? Okay, right. So that's what the poskim discusses. There are different opinions, but remind me tomorrow. Yeah.
And the second question I have: the food that you can't eat. Let's say you didn't have an Erev Tavshilin, you did cook, maybe you did a b'mezid. Is the food puzzle for everybody or just for you?
Also a good question. So remind me tomorrow. We'll begin tomorrow with those. Okay.
Thank you.